The courtroom was packed to the brim, the air thick with tension. All eyes were on Karoline Leavitt, sitting at the defendant's table, her demeanor calm, her gaze unwavering. The judge, a man known for his sharp wit and biting remarks, smirked as he looked down at her. "I see you've chosen to represent yourself," he said, a mocking tone lacing his words. "How quaint." The room erupted in quiet whispers, the spectators bracing themselves for the spectacle. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze with a quiet confidence that made the room fall silent. As the judge's mocking words hung in the air, she reached for her file, and with one swift motion, began laying out her case, not with bravado, but with precision, the kind of brilliance that demanded respect. What followed would leave everyone, from the judge to the high-priced lawyers in the room, stunned. This was no ordinary defense. It was a masterclass in strategy. And Karoline Leavitt was about to show the court exactly what she was made of. As Karoline Leavitt stood, her papers neatly organized in front of her, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. The judge, who had once scoffed at her decision to represent herself, leaned back in his chair, still wearing that smug smile. But now his eyes betrayed a hint of curiosity. "Your Honor," Karoline began, her voice steady and firm, "I didn't come here to entertain you. I came here to prove a point that's not just about me, but about the very system that's supposed to uphold justice for all." The room fell quiet, the shift in her tone unmistakable. She flipped open her first document, a series of emails that showed clear evidence of a cover-up. The defendant, a powerful political figure with far-reaching influence, had used his position to conceal vital information, effectively manipulating the system for personal gain. As Karoline methodically went through each piece of evidence, it became clear, she wasn't just playing a legal game. She was about to expose something far bigger. "These emails," she continued, her voice unwavering, "prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that my client's rights were deliberately violated. And it wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was calculated, and it was intentional." The judge, still leaning back in his chair, exchanged a glance with the opposing counsel. The smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. Karoline could feel the weight of the moment. She had their attention now. But she wasn't finished. "You see, the truth is simple, Your Honor," she said, her eyes never leaving the judge's face. "When people believe they are above the law, that the system can be bent to their will, they will continue to exploit it. But the law," she paused, letting her words hang in the air, "isn't for the powerful to control. It's for everyone, and it's time someone reminded you of that." Her final words echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. No one spoke. The judge was no longer the authoritative figure he had been when the trial began. He was now merely a man, caught in the wake of Karoline's brilliance. The opposing lawyer stood up, his voice shaky as he attempted to regain control. "Objection, Your Honor," he stammered. "This is not a political debate. This is a legal matter." Karoline calmly turned to him. "Isn't it both?" she asked, her words cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. "What good is law if it doesn't protect us all equally? If it doesn't stop the powerful from walking all over the rest of us?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Even the jury appeared taken aback. They had come into this courtroom with their minds made up. Karoline Leavitt, just another politician trying to make a name for herself, destined to falter under the weight of legal intricacies. But now, they were seeing something different. She wasn't just defending a client. She was defending an ideal. The judge, now visibly rattled, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "You've made your point, Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice noticeably less confident than before. "But the law is not based on ideals. It is based on facts." "Exactly," Karoline shot back, her eyes burning with determination. "And I've given you all the facts you need. All the proof is here, Your Honor. Now, the only question is whether you're willing to let the truth speak for itself." The judge paused, his hand hovering over the gavel, unsure. For the first time in this trial, the power seemed to have shifted. And it wasn't in the direction anyone had expected. But just as the tension reached its peak, the courtroom doors opened, and a figure stepped inside, someone unexpected. Someone whose very presence threatened to throw everything into chaos. Karoline's eyes narrowed as the new arrival entered. But she didn't flinch. Whatever came next, she knew she was ready. This battle was far from over. The figure who entered was tall, with an air of undeniable authority. The courtroom fell into a hush as the newcomer made his way toward the front. He was well dressed, in a tailored suit, his face unreadable. It was none other than Richard Caldwell, a highly influential figure in the political world, and someone who had been tied to the very case Karoline was so determined to expose. Karoline's heart raced, but her expression remained stoic. She had expected this. Caldwell had a reputation for pulling strings behind the scenes. But she had prepared for this moment. His arrival was no accident. He was here to try to derail her case, to shift the momentum back in favor of the defendant. And it was clear that his presence alone was enough to unsettle many in the room. Caldwell made his way to the defense table and took a seat beside the opposing lawyer. There was a palpable shift in the room, as if everyone could feel the tension rise with his every move. The judge, still adjusting to the turn of events, cleared his throat and motioned for order. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge began, his tone more neutral than before. "What brings you to this courtroom today?" Caldwell's voice was smooth, calm, almost comforting in its delivery. But there was an edge to it, one that hinted at the power he wielded outside these walls. "Your Honor, I believe it's important to address certain inaccuracies that have been brought up here today. While Miss Leavitt may have brought some compelling arguments, the broader context of this case..." Karoline didn't allow him to finish. She stood up quickly, cutting him off. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. "I object to Mr. Caldwell's attempt to undermine this process. He is not a witness. He is not part of the legal defense team. His presence here is nothing but an effort to intimidate this court." The judge looked over at Caldwell, his eyes narrowing. It was clear now that Caldwell had been sent to try and exert influence, to remind everyone of the invisible hands that often controlled the fates of those in the courtroom. Caldwell's smile faltered, but he quickly regained composure. "I'm only here to ensure that all aspects of the case are thoroughly examined," he said smoothly, though his voice carried an underlying tension. "Miss Leavitt's rhetoric may be passionate, but it lacks the full picture." But Karoline was ready for this. She hadn't just studied the law, she'd studied him, too. Caldwell was a master manipulator, someone who had weaved himself into the fabric of this case long before it had even reached the courtroom. She knew exactly how to expose his tactics. "Let's address the full picture then," Karoline said, her eyes now fixed on Caldwell, her voice gaining strength. "The truth is, Mr. Caldwell, you've been part of a larger scheme, one that's been orchestrated from the top down. You, like many others, thought you could intimidate me, silence me, but you underestimated something crucial. The law is not yours to control. This is not your game. This is justice." The room fell into a heavy silence. Even Caldwell, who had faced down political storms and media scrutiny, seemed momentarily caught off guard. He opened his mouth, likely ready to counter, but Karoline wasn't finished. She gestured to the evidence laid out before her, the emails, the photos, the documents that had already turned the case on its head. "This is the full picture, Your Honor," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've brought you the facts, the truth, and no matter how many men like Caldwell you bring into this room, the truth won't change." The judge, though still visibly rattled by Caldwell's unexpected entrance, took a moment to collect himself. He cleared his throat again, then turned his attention back to the defense table. "Mr. Caldwell," he said slowly, his tone now more measured, "I will not tolerate any further interference in this trial. You are not a party to this case, and if you intend to disrupt the proceedings further, I will ask you to leave." The room was tense, the weight of the moment settling in. Karoline had made her stand, and with the judge's firm words, it was clear that her defense was now back in control. Caldwell, for all his power and influence, was being stripped of the advantage he'd hoped to wield. Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. After a long pause, he stood up, nodding once in the judge's direction before retreating to the back of the room. He cast one last look at Karoline, a gaze filled with silent fury, before disappearing through the door. With the sudden departure of Caldwell, the courtroom felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. Karoline turned back to the judge, her face impassive but her mind sharp, knowing that the most crucial part of the trial was yet to come. The defense's case had been shaken, but Karoline had proven that no matter how many forces were stacked against her, she would stand tall, she would not be intimidated. "Your Honor," she said, her voice now quiet but resolute, "I call my next witness." And as the next witness took the stand, everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Karoline Leavitt was on the brink of winning. The case that had seemed so tangled and impossible at the start was now unfolding in her favor. Piece by piece, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted once again. With Caldwell now out of the picture, the defense team seemed rattled, scrambling to recover from the unexpected blow. Karoline stood poised, ready to continue her relentless pursuit of justice, while the audience, attorneys, jurors, and reporters, watched in awe at the way she handled the chaos. "Your Honor," Karoline continued, her voice unwavering, "I call my next witness, Dr. Elizabeth Stanton." She gestured toward the door, and a woman in her mid-50s, dressed in professional attire, entered the courtroom. She was calm, composed, and had an air of quiet authority. Dr. Stanton was an expert in environmental law, and her testimony was key to proving that the land in question wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. As Dr. Stanton took the stand, Karoline began with a series of pointed questions, her words deliberate and measured. "Dr. Stanton," she began, "you've reviewed the land in question and the environmental impact reports, correct?" "Yes," Dr. Stanton replied confidently. "I have reviewed all relevant documentation, including the environmental impact studies provided by the defendant, and I can confirm that the area in question is an ecologically sensitive region. Its preservation is of utmost importance." Karoline nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "And can you confirm, under your expert opinion, that the construction of the hotel complex on this land is a violation of both local and international environmental protection laws?" "Absolutely," Dr. Stanton replied, her voice strong. "The construction has not only disregarded local zoning laws but also violates several international environmental accords that this country is bound by. The ecosystem in this area is fragile, and any construction in this region puts it at significant risk." The courtroom was silent. The weight of Dr. Stanton's testimony hit everyone like a hammer. Karoline had managed to bring an expert to the stand who wasn't just knowledgeable, she was irrefutable. The defense attorney, Carlos Brenner, immediately stood up, his face flushed with frustration. "Objection, Your Honor," he said sharply. "Dr. Stanton's testimony is purely based on her personal opinions and assumptions. She has no direct involvement with the land in question, and her conclusions are speculative at best." Karoline turned slowly to face the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I ask that we proceed with the witness's testimony. Dr. Stanton is a recognized expert in environmental law, and her opinion is based on her extensive knowledge of both the law and the specific conditions of the land. Her testimony is both relevant and factual." The judge, who had been leaning toward Brenner's objection, now seemed to pause. He glanced at the expert witness before nodding slowly. "Objection overruled. Dr. Stanton may continue." Karoline's eyes gleamed with determination as she turned back to Dr. Stanton. "So, Dr. Stanton, would you say that the actions of the defendants, beginning with the illegal construction of the hotel complex, could result in irreversible damage to the environment?" Dr. Stanton paused for a moment, carefully choosing her words. "Yes," she replied, her voice unwavering. "The damage is not only irreversible, but the environmental loss would be catastrophic. Once a habitat like this is destroyed, it cannot be restored. The biodiversity will be lost forever." Karoline's voice rang clear as she turned to address the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we are talking about here is not just a property dispute. This is a matter of life and death, of the destruction of an irreplaceable ecosystem. If we allow the defendants to succeed in their actions, we set a precedent where corporate greed outweighs the protection of the land that sustains us all." Her words hung in the air like a powerful statement of intent. The jury was silent, each member of the panel visibly affected by the weight of the testimony. Brenner stood up again, now visibly shaken. "Your Honor," he said, his voice now less sure. "This is all irrelevant. The defendants are not the ones destroying the land. They are simply following the law. Laws that have been approved by the proper authorities. This is a bureaucratic issue, not a matter of ecological concern." Karoline turned to him, her expression cold. "Then tell me, Mr. Brenner," she asked, her voice sharp and cutting. "Why has the Environmental Protection Agency issued warnings about this project? Why are international conservation groups raising alarms? If this is simply a bureaucratic issue, why is there so much at stake?" The room went still, and Brenner faltered. He was momentarily at a loss for words. The truth was, there was no good answer. He knew it, and the jury knew it too. Karoline seized the opportunity. "Mr. Brenner," she continued, "you can argue all you want that this is just another legal battle. But the truth is clear. The defendants chose to ignore the law when it suited them. They violated environmental regulations to build their luxury hotel on protected land. And they did it knowingly. That is not just an oversight, that is criminal behavior." There was a murmur in the room, and the judge's eyes narrowed as he observed Karoline's unwavering conviction. Brenner had no response. His defense was crumbling. Karoline leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked with the jury. "What we have here is not just an issue of ownership. It's an issue of responsibility. Responsibility to the land, to the people, and to future generations. The defendants thought they could get away with this because they believed they were untouchable. But they are not. Today, we have the opportunity to hold them accountable for their actions." The tension in the room reached its peak. Karoline had made her case clear, strong, and irrefutable. The next move would be the jury's. But one thing was certain. The momentum was on her side. Just as the judge was about to call for a short recess, the doors to the courtroom opened once again. This time with a different energy. The courtroom gasped as a well-known journalist, Amelia Cross, stepped into the room. She had been covering the case from the start. But this time, she wasn't just a passive observer. Amelia had something to say. Karoline's eyes met hers, and the air in the courtroom seemed to charge with anticipation. Amelia was about to make a move that no one saw coming. And it could change the entire course of the trial. "Your Honor," Amelia said, speaking directly to the judge, "I have new evidence that could potentially alter the outcome of this case." The entire room fell silent. Every eye locked on her. It was clear. The next chapter of this case was about to unfold in a way no one could have predicted. The judge raised an eyebrow, his gavel hovering mid-air. He had not expected this. The courtroom, already tense from the courtroom battles between Karoline and the defense, now felt like a pressure cooker, with everyone holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. "Ms. Cross," the judge said, his voice measured but wary, "you are not a part of this case. How do you justify interrupting these proceedings with new evidence?" Amelia Cross, known for her sharp investigative skills and reputation for uncovering scandals, stood confidently, unfazed by the judge's stern tone. "Your Honor, I understand your concern. However, this is a matter of public interest and the integrity of the case. I have uncovered documents that directly implicate the defendants and show that their actions were not just reckless, but premeditated." The room was buzzing with quiet murmurs. Karoline, ever sharp and composed, leaned forward. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that the evidence Ms. Cross is referring to be presented in court. This could be the final piece of the puzzle we need to fully expose the corruption at play here." Brenner, the defense lawyer, immediately shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is not how the legal process works. We cannot allow journalists to bring in evidence out of the blue. This is outrageous." The judge held up a hand to silence him. "Mr. Brenner, I'll be the one to decide whether or not this evidence is admissible. Ms. Cross, you may present the documents. But understand that we will scrutinize everything." Amelia nodded and stepped forward, holding a thick folder in her hands. "I've obtained an email chain between Mr. Caldwell and the CEO of the construction company. It shows that not only were they aware of the environmental risks of the project, but they also deliberately manipulated government officials to bypass the necessary regulations. They even altered the land survey data to hide the true boundaries of the property. Karoline's heart raced, but she kept her cool. This was it, the smoking gun. If this evidence was genuine, it would prove everything. The judge gestured for her to proceed, and Amelia laid the documents on the table. She began reading aloud the key excerpts. One by one, she detailed how Caldwell had pressured local officials to approve the project, despite the undeniable environmental damage it would cause. The emails even outlined a plan to adjust the property lines, circumventing the legal requirements and allowing the hotel to expand beyond the legal boundaries. As Amelia read on, the air in the room grew heavier, the weight of the revelation settling on everyone's shoulders. The defense team was visibly shaken, their smug confidence evaporating. Brenner's face had drained of color, and Caldwell, though still seated in the back, seemed to shrink into his chair, his expression darkening with each word Amelia read. Karoline, however, was focused. She knew this evidence could make all the difference. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm yet filled with intensity. What we see here is not only a violation of environmental law, but a deliberate conspiracy to alter public records and deceive the authorities. The defendants thought they were above the law, but now we have the proof. They cannot hide from their actions any longer. The judge was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the documents. Finally, he looked up, addressing the courtroom. This evidence is admissible. Mr. Brenner, I expect you to respond accordingly. Brenner had no immediate response. His legal mind was working in overdrive, trying to find a way out, but the truth was in front of him, laid out for everyone to see. The case had taken an irreversible turn, and there was no denying it anymore. Karoline took a deep breath and turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about accountability. It's about ensuring that no one, no matter how powerful they are, is allowed to break the law with impunity. The truth has come to light, and it's clear. These defendants cannot be allowed to destroy our land and manipulate the system for their own gain. We must hold them accountable, not just for the sake of this case, but for the integrity of our society. The jury was silent, but their expressions had changed. The skepticism that had once been visible on their faces had faded. They had seen the truth. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Brenner tried to regain his composure, standing up and addressing the judge, his voice shaky. Your Honor, we request a recess to review the new evidence and reassess our position. The judge, clearly losing patience, shook his head. This trial will continue as planned. You have had ample time to prepare your defense. Mr. Brenner, the truth has been laid out for you. The jury has seen it. We shall proceed. With that, the gavel came down. The courtroom was filled with the sound of reporters scribbling frantically, whispers of disbelief spreading through the audience. Amelia had not only uncovered the truth, but she had also ensured that the defendants' efforts to bury it were now exposed for all to see. Karoline felt the weight of the moment. This battle was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like victory was within her grasp. The defendants, who had once held all the cards, were now cornered. The evidence was undeniable, and Karoline had proven, without a doubt, that the law was not something they could manipulate or escape. As the trial continued, the momentum had firmly shifted in Karoline's favor. But the game wasn't over yet. There were still challenges to face, and the final victory would not come easily. But with each passing day, the truth had become undeniable, and Karoline was more determined than ever to see this through to the end. And as the courtroom settled back into a tense silence, the judge turned to Karoline, a rare acknowledgement in his eyes. Miss Leavitt, I must admit, I underestimated you, but I can see now that you came prepared. Karoline met his gaze and nodded, her voice steady. Justice doesn't require preparation, Your Honor, she said softly. It simply requires truth. The trial was nearing its end, and with every new piece of evidence, the weight of Karoline's case grew stronger. The defense was reeling, their arguments crumbling under the pressure of facts and undeniable truths. The judge, though initially skeptical, now seemed to have gained a grudging respect for Karoline's relentless pursuit of justice. As the final day of the trial approached, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Karoline had already made her closing argument, laying out everything the jury needed to understand: the deliberate actions of the defendants, the environmental destruction they caused, and the corruption they had tried to conceal. The ball was now in the jury's hands, and it was clear that Karoline had done everything in her power to ensure that justice would be served. The defense, though shaken, tried one last-ditch effort. Brenner, now desperate, stood to deliver his closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "this case is not as simple as it has been portrayed. There are complexities, nuances, and misunderstandings that have been misrepresented here. Yes, there were mistakes, but no one intended to break the law. We ask you to consider the bigger picture and the good that this development will bring." The jury remained silent, their eyes fixed on Brenner. But there was no denying the emptiness in his words. No one believed him anymore. Karoline stood up one final time, her presence commanding the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice steady but filled with unwavering conviction. "You have seen the truth. You have seen the evidence. And you have heard the words of the defense, who have offered nothing but excuses and empty rhetoric. The truth is simple. The defendants violated the law, exploited the land, and destroyed something irreplaceable. They thought they could get away with it because they had power, money, and influence. But the law is not for the powerful to control. It is for all of us. And it is time we remind them of that." The words hung in the air, powerful and unassailable. Karoline turned to face the jury. "This case is not just about a piece of land. It is about accountability. It is about ensuring that justice is not swayed by wealth or influence. It is about protecting the rights of every citizen, every person who believes in fairness and the rule of law." The judge, who had been watching her intently, finally spoke. "The jury will now deliberate and return with a verdict. We will reconvene shortly." The room emptied, and the silence in the courtroom was almost deafening. Karoline sat at her table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had done everything she could. Now, all she could do was wait. As the minutes stretched into an agonizing hour, Karoline tried to keep her mind focused. She thought about all the people who had fought alongside her, all the people who believed in the cause, and the land she had sworn to protect. She thought about the future, about what would happen if they won, about the hope that would bloom from this victory. Finally, the jury returned, and the tension in the air was palpable. The judge called the courtroom to order, and everyone stood as the jury foreperson stepped forward, holding the sealed envelope containing the verdict. "Your Honor," the foreperson began, her voice steady, "we, the jury, have reached a unanimous decision." The room held its breath. "We find the defendants guilty of willful misconduct, violation of environmental laws, and deliberate falsification of documents. We order full restitution to the plaintiff, Karoline Leavitt, and additional penalties for the illegal actions taken by the defendants." A ripple of gasps spread through the room. The defense team, once so confident, now stood motionless, stunned by the verdict. Karoline allowed herself a brief moment of quiet triumph. She had won, against all odds, against the powerful forces that sought to silence her. She had prevailed. The courtroom erupted in whispers, and even the judge, for once, seemed impressed. "Karoline Leavitt," the judge said, his tone now more respectful than before, "you have demonstrated extraordinary legal acumen and an unshakable commitment to justice. This court has witnessed a rare and powerful defense of the law." Karoline stood, her heart pounding with relief and satisfaction. She turned to the jury, her voice calm and filled with gratitude. "Thank you for your courage," she said, her eyes meeting each of theirs. "You did what was right." As the gavel came down, marking the end of the trial, Karoline felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The battle had been long, the stakes high, but it had been worth every moment. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for the land, for the people, and for the belief that truth, no matter how hard fought, would always prevail. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, cameras flashing as they rushed to capture the story. The headlines would write themselves: Karoline Leavitt versus corruption, a fight for justice and the land. But as Karoline stepped into the bright sunlight, she didn't need the accolades or the attention. The only thing that mattered was that she had stood her ground. She had fought for what was right, and she had won. And as she walked away from the courthouse, knowing the world was watching, Karoline Leavitt couldn't help but smile. The truth had not only set her free, it had changed everything. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more incredible content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Stay tuned for more exciting videos. And I'll see you in the next one.